And here we go. So this is Bob Dennis from Micropulse, and I have been making PEMF devices for a while. And one of the people who uses them, who's done a lot of creative things with PEMF devices, is Aaron Coffey, who is with me today. And we're just going to basically have a sort of a free-form discussion. So Aaron and I will just talk about topics of interest as they emerge.
All right, so yeah, I'm Aaron Coffey, and I'm 34, and I've been using Micropulse now for a little over 2 years. Basically, I tell people that I was healthy in the sense of the standard American diet. So I didn't grow up in some home where we were all athletes or anything like that, but neither was anyone in my family like chronically ill or sick. So I'm an average American kid, born in the mid-1980s, grew up in the 90s, just played and ate like all other kids. So I ate a lot of junk food, but also ate fairly decent too. And I took some medicine for acne when I was a teenager, and it just really messed up my gut. But I didn't know that at the time. And I just went to college, ate the college lifestyle, and in very Jordan Rubin-esque manner, my health just started going down. And I wouldn't blame anybody or anything in particular. It's just I didn't know how to eat. I didn't realize the cause and effect for diet and nutrition. And I was just like any other teenager. I was just living life. Didn't do drugs or alcohol or smoke or anything like that. So it wasn't that component that started damaging my body. It was just eating out at fast food restaurants and staying up late and watching movies with your friends and things like that. And just doing that while going to college and grad school just really depleted my body of various needs that I think everyone has.
Yeah.
That's kind of my background. I basically tried different things. I sought help from standard doctors largely at that time. I always tell people.
So what was your primary complaint? What was it, even if you didn't know quite what was going on inside?
Yeah.
What was your feeling that brought you to doctors?
Pretty much that I would have described. I didn't think that I had food allergies, but I knew that I was miserable when I ate food. So I always tell people I didn't have any structural abnormalities other than, anyone else that's fallen down and bumped and injured themselves in that manner. But I also didn't have any bleeding either. So we weren't as severe as like a chronic diagnosable disease or bleeding. I was just in pain. So I wouldn't have called it fibromyalgia. I would have called it, this stinks, that I hurt a lot.
Right.
Aches and pains. You go out to eat and you would call it, oh, I got food poisoning, but I doubt you get food poisoning every single time you eat. And so
right.
I was just learning the language of, I just don't know how to take care of myself very well, and I want to take my health to the next level. And so fast forward to my late 20s, and my health had gotten to the point where it was probably its worst. I had a lot of seasonal allergies, a lot of gut problems, but still no bleeding or any major diagnosable diseases. So I'd go into a doctor and they'd be like, oh, you're fine. But I'm like, well, I feel awful. And I wanted to be well. And so I experimented with a doctor I'm good friends with in Nashville who did some acupressure on me that helped deal with the gut and seasonal allergy issues. And I felt like, man, I'm healthier than I've ever been. However, I could still not address the issues of aches and pains, what felt like was deep in my bones, if you will. Like deep in my joints and my bones. I was like, I can eat whatever I want. I can travel. I don't get seasonal allergy problems anymore. I feel great, but I'm still aching. And it's still hard for me to walk long distances, still using insoles in my feet. And I was like, I'm 30 some years old. I don't want to have to I'm too young for this. And I know there's both natural and pharmaceutical approaches to helping when you have aches and pains, but I wanted to try something different. And so how I found Micropulse is frankly, I was reading about the effects of magnetism on the body, and I was kind of skeptical. But to tell you the truth, years ago, a friend of mine had worked near an industrial truck plant, and his sister's boyfriend had brought home this big mass of neodymium magnets that had been on a heavy-duty frame, but they had shattered, so they were throwing them out. And so he was like, oh, you can take them home. So all us young kids, were really excited to get this big chunk of magnets. And I remember as a teenager, a college kid, I would just experiment with them. So once I left it at the end of my bed, came home for college, forgot it was there, went to sleep, and I slept so good. But it was like this massive chunk of heavy duty magnets.
Wow, that's
6
interesting.
days in a row. Every night I would dream extremely lucidly, and I would sleep really, really good. So I was kind of exposed to this. I've got this really powerful magnet near my head. I don't know what that's doing, but I didn't feel bad. I felt good. And so that's kind of probably what exposed me to, all right, how do I get to getting better? And I'm open to the magnet thing, but I'm not real sure that it's really powerful enough to help me, or
Yeah.
actually a placebo, or if it's just, I want it to work. I'm not really sure. So I was on YouTube flicking through channels,
Mhm.
and I found Joe Cohen's recording of you from a couple years ago. I watched the part 1 and part 2, and I told my wife and I told my family, I said, well, I can scrounge up the money, save my Christmas and birthday money. And this was like in the fall of the year. My birthday and Christmas is around, my birthday's around Christmas. Saved up all this money, and then I bought my first A9B model. And 3 days of using it off and on. The first day I got home, I came home right when I got it in the mail, ran home, signed for it, and I didn't even read the directions. I put it on wrong, turned it on, then I read the directions while it was on me backwards, freaked
Mhm.
out, thinking I'd hurt myself, which I didn't because I didn't feel any pain. But I was just like I was just so excited that I was kind of jittery about it. And yeah, I just could feel, I was like, wow, I actually feel something. And I thought that was pretty amazing. So I used it for 3 days after reading the directions and watching the videos. And I can notice a major change because I'd been going to an osteopath friend of mine just to ask why I was struggling to walk more than 2,500 steps a day without aches and pains in my knee. Because
Mhm.
x-rays show there's nothing actually wrong with my frame, but it just felt like my knee was locking up. And I could take curcumin or magnesium and get some relief, but it wouldn't be long term. And so I was like, I want to do more than just that. And so he said, you need to be at 6,000 steps a day. I know you do a lot of sitting because I was doing IT work at the time.
Mhm.
I sit a lot for my job, and I didn't want to be in that state forever. So he said, you got to do more than this. So I used micropulse, and then I had this ingenious idea, or maybe it was just a nerdy idea, but I took the 2x2 coil, and I cut holes in the tops of my pockets for my pants, and then I would just put this in the back part of my pants, just inside where the pressure of the belt coming up against me could hold on to it. And so against my lumbar sciatic kind of area, which I didn't really have sciatic pain, but I just put it there, and then I would run the cords, kind of wrap them up and stick them down in my pocket. And then I had my little A9 model, which I don't have at the moment, but basically I had, a small device like the M1 that I own now, just stuck it in there, and I'd put on lower setting, and I would just run it all day, every day while I was at work. And I noticed that 3 months later, I was up to 6,000 steps, and it was incredible. So I used it for 6 months, and then most of the aches and pains that I had, they went away.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because my whole approach to this was, philosophically similar to yours, but physically kind of experientially different, right? Because I started off as a big time skeptic, and you probably have heard the story. I got asked to do some consulting for NASA, making pulse magnetic fields, and my official response to them was, don't waste your time. That stuff doesn't work. Of course, I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at the literature, the literature quality wasn't so good. But when you do the experiments on cells or small, just smaller biological systems, it's pretty clear that there are effects. But in my case, it wasn't like food I was eating. I was very physically active. I was a firefighter and all this stuff, and then I hurt myself really pretty badly and couldn't get relief. And they just kept handing me, oxycodone and stuff like that. So in my case, I just did it out of desperation. I literally dusted off an old prototype I had built for NASA 10 years earlier and put it on my back.
Hmm.
And
So you weren't using this from the time you left NASA to the time you got injured.
no, it was kind of political. I mean, yeah, I actually was, the problem was that I was doing this as a consultant for NASA, and then there was a lot of misrepresentation and incorrect kind of reporting of what we did, and so I kind of removed myself from it. Sort of, I sort of removed myself from the whole. I removed myself from the whole NASA thing. I had worked with them for a while and worked for DARPA, doing some military type research on it, but I didn't like the direction that they were going in at NASA. And so I just I put it down because to me at that time, in the early 2000s, it wasn't that important to me. I was trying to build my academic career.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, if you do research in this area and you're a young academic without tenure, you will kill your career. You will never get tenure. You will never have a career. You have got to stay straight-laced and focused on something where you can get grant money consistently right away. So that's what I did for about 10 years. But then about 10 years ago, when I hurt myself and the system failed me,
yeah,
I went back to what I knew, and that's how it worked for me. So I'm just delighted to know that it works for other people for other things. But I do the same thing you do. I just sort of slip the coils right behind my back, right on my lower spine, hold them in with sort of your belt pressure, and you don't have to do anything too complex. But anyway, so that's sort of, so you and I are coming at this from different, we're converging, but from different directions, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I would say that I was always kind of a sciencey type person. Pretty much anyone that knows me would say that. And I imagine there's a lot of people that would purchase your product that are the same way. And then I imagine there's people that are more like my mom and dad or my grandparents' generation who are starting to feel the effects of age and aging on their bodies. And maybe I started to get a taste of what that would be like 20, 30 years from now. And it's not fun and you don't want to live with it. And you frankly, everybody has this dream, I think, that they can just live to the end of their life with no pain, no sickness, no disease. And then one day they'll just go to sleep and wake up. I mean, I think that's all of us want. Nobody wants to have a heart attack or kidney problems or anything like that.
Certainly not a chronic disease. You don't want to go through life with a chronic disease. But what I find now in my 50s is that most people have some kind of chronic complaint.
Yep. As I became fascinated with the technology, I'm kind of a DIY guy as far as learning, mildly photographic. And so I'll just continue to use YouTube because it's such a free expression platform for people to say, hey, I'm using this type of technology to do this. And this guy over here is doing something different. But it's interesting how, and I think we've talked about this before, I come at it from a different standpoint when I look to find solutions to problems. I just kind of give people the benefit of the doubt. Like I'm very skeptical in my dissection of the nature of somebody's proposal, but I don't start out assuming, oh, this is just totally hogwash and it can't be true. Because if I do that, I've learned that if I do that, either academically or just in life experience, I throw out so much good that might actually be there that I've missed.
I can assure you, every time I've ever had that attitude, I've been wrong. And every time I've ever come at a problem thinking that, I'm wrong, so I don't think that way anymore.
I think that everybody probably knows something about something. And there's a lot of things that they're wrong about, but we don't necessarily know what that is until we're willing to dig through and see. Because everybody wants to believe that everybody has some sort of knowledge about something.
Right.
Even people that have wasted much of their life still know something about something.
And they know something about their body and they know something about how they feel. And a lot of times, because I'm so deeply embedded in basic science, right?
Yeah.
A lot of my colleagues will disparagingly say about things like what I'm working on now. Oh, well, that's just a placebo effect. And, if you feel better and more vital and your life is improved, in a way, it doesn't matter if it's a placebo effect, right? In fact, they're even looking at the placebo effect now as a potential serious therapeutic modality.
Well, philosophically, I come from a home where I'm not on either path uniformly. So like I spent some time in public school. I spent some time in homeschooling. I went to public education schools in the higher education sense, but I also did private education. So I've kind of felt like I've done the whole gamut of what society in the educational sense has to offer. So even though my bachelor's and my master's has nothing to do with this field, I do feel like it helped me to be a critical thinker and to apply the traditional scientific method approach to testing, evaluating, looking for solutions, and then repeating to see, did this actually happen? And then expanding and having someone else do this experiment and see, hey, was it just me? Or did my wife and my friends also have the same types of results for their own bodies? And it's been true. It's actually worked just as well for them.
Well, you've captured actually the key for science, the key factor that makes something truly scientific. Not statistics, and it's not control so much as it is replicability. Okay. Yep. and the ability to repeat something. And this is where mainstream research, medical research, has really fallen down. There's books written about this, and maybe I'll reference one down below called Rigor Mortis. I think I mentioned it to you, by Richard Harris, who's an NPR reporter. And what he reports is that 75% to 90% of leading medical research is not replicable. So they can't repeat it from one lab to the next. And that means 75 to 90% of our modern research in the area of cancer, that's what he was saying, is really in a fundamental sense, it's not really science, because you can't you can't replicate it, right? You can't replicate the experiment. So a lot of scientists who speak disparagingly about observational or descriptive research are missing the point. Because if you can see something that happens with a person and it repeats itself, in all kinds of different situations with all kinds of different people, you can start to say some pretty important things. And that's the approach I'm taking with PEMF now. Even though I'm, in one half I'm doing like this hardcore mathematical modeling, testing and testing for molecular mechanisms. But I think the most important information comes from people like you, who are actually, there's several thousand people I talk to now, as you know. Yeah. And they look at all kinds of different things. A lot of them are clinicians, and they themselves talk to hundreds of people. And taken, in aggregate, the results are very clear. It's like, there's very, very huge benefits and virtually no negative side effects from PEMF.
I've always found it to be interesting that, as a science buff, historically, you could look at the history of scientific progression, and you see that if you go back several hundred years, when people applied the actual scientific method to their research, and then communities thought, oh, that's so strange, and in some cases they thought it was magic, perhaps because it was so extraordinary, and they were quick to throw it out. At least the people that were part of the establishment of that day, I guess you could say. But I found it to be interesting in my own personal research. If you look, we start out with like Louis Pasteur or the contemporaries of his generation, where you have the understanding of a bacterium and you have biology, stuff that they could see under a microscope as optical technology was developing. And you go from that to understanding of chemistry and the world of chemicals and molecules and so forth like that, the development of a lot of our pharmaceutical drugs. And then there's like this brief time period where everybody is studying bioelectricity and electrical effects on the body, but then it vanishes. And then you're suddenly in the atomic world, where we're now using X-ray technology and we're using things like that. But it's like there's this huge gap that's making me so fascinated with, we've got biology and we've got like antibiotic technology, which is sort of like the effects of chemicals on biology. And then you've got chemicals, and then you've got like radiation therapy. But this real core element to our body, which seems to be ignored, is the bioelectric, kinetic electric component of the body.
I think I understand why that happened, because a couple of hundred years ago, we started to do the chemical approach to medicine, and it became part of the establishment. And then about 100 years ago, we started to do the whole electro-medicine aspect of medicine. But it just so happens that in 1910, the big thing that changed the course of modern medicine happened. And in 1910, I believe that was the correct year, the Flexner Report was published. And I'll try to put a link down to it, but basically it was by a person who wasn't even a clinician. He was hired, I think, by the Carnegie Institution. We're trying to root out all of the, quackery that was going on in medicine. Yeah. And so what they really attacked was the newest, latest, greatest thing, which was, it was homeopathy, and then basically electromedicine. And they were really singled out as quackery. Well, they hadn't really had a chance to fully develop yet. But you had established chemical medicine that was kind of not really attacked because it was so much embedded in the establishment. But electromedicine was fairly new, and it was subject to being attacked and disparaged, and that's what happened. And so now, I can tell you as a scientist, if you start to talk about electromedicine, anything more than using a pacemaker to stimulate heart contractions, if you really talk anything more about it than that, PEMF or anything else, you really find yourself immediately marginalized on the fringe and really kind of stigmatized. And it's because of this report in 1910 called the Flexner Report.
100
So
years have gone by, and it's pretty amazing that it's kind of hypocritical, to be honest, because we don't apply this same sort of methodology to science in areas that don't relate to medicine. And I know that there have probably been there has been, quackery out there in the past, and that's always going to be the case as long as you live in a society with people that want to profit off of lies. I mean,
there's
that's
quackery now.
yeah, there's
There's,
quackery now,
there's
but the
quackery now.
quackery doesn't. There are people that aren't quackery that are actually innovating, but because there's some sort of like hyper analytical radar that's not rooted in reality, that seems to be rooted
Right.
in like what they want to be true. That's the only thing you can think about. It's like I'm looking at, you read about quantum physics. How advanced is the quantum field? But most doctors that are medical doctors don't know very much about quantum physics, or they don't think about, wow, if that's the next layer of reality, then what does that have to do with what I'm doing right now? How does that have a
The
connection?
biological implications of quantum physics are as yet unexplored, largely.
Electromagnetism might be somewhere in that. That's a
I
very
think of
reality.
I think of electromagnetism as the other half of medicine that we literally threw out 100 years ago.
With Rife.
Because we stigmatized anybody who worked in that area. And I can tell you, you get stigmatized quite aggressively. It has laid dormant for 100 years. So let me just tell you a story that I think is really funny. One of my colleagues, Mark Tomerdahl, the guy who invented the brain gauge, he and I helped him. He was really the guy who did it. He and his graduate students. He was at a meeting for brain injury about a year and a half ago. And it was a really big meeting with all these big wigs from the military and from National Science Foundation and NIH. And he came up and he gave this data showing how our device really improved head injury in cases where it just wouldn't help people. And this very important person, I won't name him, but he was sort of more or less at the top of military research on traumatic brain injury. He like rifled up out of his chair and he goes, "Oh my God, that's the most important data that I've ever seen.
Wow.
We've got to figure out what's that drug. You got to tell me what drug you're using, and we got to do research on that drug right now." And he said the word drug like 5 or 6 times because he had missed the point that Mark was not talking about a drug.
Yeah.
So then my colleague Mark said, "Well, actually, it is really awesome data. There is nothing like this. That we've never seen a response like this. I'm glad you're really enthusiastic about it, but it's not a drug. It's PEMF that's having all these beneficial effects." And the guy's demeanor he melted like, one of those wax figures. He was like, "Well, that's got to be just a placebo effect. And I'm sure you've just got something wrong." So you see how receptive he was when it was a chemical.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, instantaneously, I mean, just as fast as his physiologic state could change, he went completely 180 degrees and discounted all the same data.
I think it's wild. I really, looking at history, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it's very strange that there's so much technology that we have out right now in our hands, in our pocketbooks, on our computers, etc. And we're so receptive to innovation in that area. But it's like, medically speaking, we're still using methodologies that are old. I mean, if we look at, you've got a Tesla car and you've got who knows what the space program is actually working on now compared to prototypes from when I was born. I mean, if you look at how this F-117 was basically on the drawing boards in the 1960s,
right?
Until I was a small child when we were flying over the Middle East, and then no one knew what it was then. So it's like, I've always heard that, and you may be able to speak to this better, but I've always heard that government technology is about 40 years more advanced than what we have, and that just as a rough thing, if it's about 40 years more advanced than what we have now, because I know some people that worked in pretty deeply embedded in the government or the military, and they would take people to the Spy Museum and other places and say, "Now, do you see this type of technology? Look at that little spot right there. Yeah, this technology was there back when, but you only use that 30 years later."
Well, let me tell you a couple of things that are interesting. Actually, now that we're on the topic, if you don't mind nerding out with me here, we can have like a little nerd session, right? So I used to work on Star Wars, not the movie, but the actual program. I worked on kinetic energy weapons. And everybody always talks about how Ronald Reagan, 1980s,
Yeah.
was the guy who pushed this forward and brought it to the world.
Yeah.
But I was sitting down in a underground engineering research bunker in Los Angeles working on it when I was a youngster, when I was in my 20s. And a lot of the engineering documentation for these satellites was dated like late 1950s, early 1960s. So I can assure you that it was not Ronald Reagan who was promoting this at first. But what you're saying, I think, fundamentally is true. It's 30, 40, 50 years in advance and sometimes more.
Internet, other things.
Oh, absolutely. But, the thing is that, technology really does advance very quickly. You can go from if you look at the progression of aerospace, right? You went from basically no airplanes, only balloons, no heavier than air flight, all the way to the first moon landing in about 60 years.
It's incredible.
So how far have we advanced? And computing is the same thing. This is Moore's law, right? It builds on itself geometrically. Computing is the same way. I mean, I remember my first computer, was I biked down to Radio Shack when I was like a little kid, and it was a kit you had to put together. When you got the whole computer to work, it would make some red and green LEDs flash. Now look what we've got, right? But you compare the progress of medicine.
Yep.
Let me tell you an impression. I'm actually writing a book about this because it's quite interesting. I know a lot of older engineers, a lot of people that I've worked with over the years. One of them was a father of one of my very close friends in college. His name was Ed Gilbert. And Ed Gilbert was one of the first 3 people to get a PhD in computer engineering from University of Michigan. And he ended up getting prostate cancer and was dying when I was in graduate school. And it was really unfortunate. He was in the early 60s, extremely intelligent, thoughtful person, helped me out a lot. And so I was trying to help him with this. And he actually had designed part of the computer systems that went into the Apollo spacecraft, right?
Wow.
So this was not this was not like the average run-of-the-mill sort of nerd like me. This guy was really smart, okay? So I'm talking to him, and he said, well, you know what, Bob, this is like any engineering problem. I've got to solve this prostate cancer. I'm just going to find the expert, and I'm going to get the information necessary. I'm going to go right to the edge of technology, and I'm going to defeat this thing. So after a couple of months, I was over talking to him, and he said, Bob, what the hell have you guys been doing? Talking to me as a biomedical engineer. I said, well, what, Ed? He said, you guys haven't done anything. He said, I've been through this and through this and through this, and I've been tracking the technology of prostate cancer. He's like, we built spaceships and we built computers and we did. He said, I figured you guys in biology and medicine were doing the same thing. You were doing your part. He said, you guys have not been pulling your weight. He's like, what's going on? So I tried to, I couldn't disagree with him, right? But I was still young. I was still in graduate school at the time. And I was like, well, gee, I don't know what these guys have been doing, but it turns out I'm writing a whole book about it. It's very complicated why medicine has made so few really significant advances in the last 50 years. There's good reasons for it. But I guess my point is that Ed Gilbert's story, now I've heard the story from other people, oftentimes technologists, very often technologists who work for the government and very complex, like, the moonshot or something like that. And then as soon as they get involved in medical technology, as soon as they have a need, they all get kind of angry because they want to know, what the heck have we been doing? And the answer is,
well, then they start having needs themselves. They're hoping for technological, revolution in the medical field. And it's rather obsolete compared to the technology that's both publicly known and privately known in the scientific field, it seems like.
Yes, it really is. And it's like the whole philosophical approach is different. People are just in other areas of technology. There's this exponential growth called Moore's law, right? It was, and it's like every 18 months or 24 months, it doubles, right? Yeah. And so things get better. Computer memory gets better, processing gets better. But it's not just electronic stuff. Materials get better, and other aspects of technology get better. I mean, if you just look at shipping, right? Like when I was a kid, you ordered something on, there was no online, but if you order something by mail, it was 6 to 8 weeks for delivery, right? Yeah. And that usually meant 10 to 14 weeks. So if you ordered something in the spring,
Mhm.
you'd get it in the fall. That's about how long it took. And nowadays, if I order something from Amazon.com right now, I've got a pretty reasonable expectation I'm going to get late this evening, right?
Yep, pretty
So
much.
there's, and all that stuff just keeps getting better and better. Moore's law, right? There's one area of technology, and this guy writes about it from the NPR. They call it Eroom's law, Eroom,
Never heard
which
of
is
it.
Moore's. It's Moore's spelled backwards.
Oh,
It's Eroom's law. It's the law that actually describes the downward slope of medical technology. So that if you were to actually plot the number of diseases cured every year, it's smaller and smaller, right? And you can do this with like number of effective vaccines developed gets smaller and smaller every year. Number of antibiotics developed smaller and smaller. Number of new novel,
approaches.
devices, medical devices, it's smaller and smaller. And we keep talking about it. People in the industry keep hyping it like it's something new, but there's just the same old junk.
More of the same thing. I mean, I always relate it to like automobiles, for instance.
Yeah.
Another hot topic. You look at automobile engines. They're essentially the same type of thing that we've been doing. It's not like we've come out and said, now we have an electric this, or now we have the science fantasy anti-gravity thing. I mean, it's not like we're not coming up with a completely different type of innovation like we would when we moved from a BlackBerry to an iPhone, or when we moved from a flip phone to another massive revolutionary change. It's like it's basically tweaks on the same design for 100 years. And I feel like the medical system's the same, but it's so strange to me philosophically. You look at the scientific community and especially the Darwinian paradigm of great skepticism. So there's this great skepticism that also looks to innovate out of the worldview of skepticism, which is, I think, more difficult than what I hold to as more of an intelligent design, where I look for an evidence of design, and then I'm not surprised when I find something that works. That's just me.
I think I like your approach. My approach is that I just assume that I'm kind of stupid, and so I pay attention to things, and if they seem to be real, then I kind of poke at them with a stick a little bit. Use the tools of science, and I say, is that really real? But I always do it giving people a benefit of the doubt. Now, there are bad people out there, especially in PEMF. There's a lot of charlatanism, so you got to watch out for that. But I just make the assumption that I don't know what I'm talking about, and I mostly
the medical world would apply that same. I wish that, for instance, the populace, or at least the scientists, you assume that if somebody's not good in the production of their product, okay, well, we'll just go to somebody else who's better. You don't automatically assume that the person that's producing the product has godlike powers and you should listen to everything he has to say, testing it. We don't do that with science. We don't do that with technology, but we do with medicine. Oh, the doctor said this, it's true. Really? Well, you don't do that with, well, the iPhone is better than the Android. No, it's not. It's blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Back and forth. You don't do that with part of your life, but you do it with your medical side.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because that faith in medicine has really eroded. Like, because I'm a little older than you, so I get a little bit more perspective. Yeah. When I was a child, when I was 10 or 12 or 14, I mean, when a doctor told you something, that was it. There was no questioning it. Mm-hmm. But it's really been in the last 20 years or so that people have started saying, hey, my doctor's giving me things that are kind of making me sicker, or they're not helping me, and he doesn't have answers. Mm-hmm. And so people are starting much more so now to question it. And I think when you add the effect that information, when I was a kid, getting medical information like data or ideas was impossible because it was very controlled. But nowadays you can get on the internet. As you say, YouTube is a great thing because people can tell you things, give you ideas that you would never have had access to 20 years ago.
Well, I want to make a disclaimer. I also have a lot of friends in the medical community, both academic medical people, doctors, and then also people on the more Eastern side, where acupuncturists and, chiropractors, whatever. The people that I know, I mean, just like everyone, you meet some doctors, you're like, oh, this guy's a really great guy. He's doing it for the right reasons. You meet other people and you're like, I don't think he's doing it for the right reasons, or he's out of date.
There's a big spectrum.
That's your car garage. That's your, that's not just medicine. So I think that people give the medical establishment a bad rap when they say everybody's evil and they're all out to hurt you. I don't think that's true.
You're absolutely right. There's a huge spectrum. There's a huge spectrum. And I mean, I socialize with these people every day, right? Like friends of mine are chairs of, medical departments. And one day it was about 11 months ago, I think I told you, I had the chair of one surgery department at a really major university who I used to go mountain biking with, so I know the guy really well, and another chair of a different department of surgery at a different major university. And the three of us were just kind of hanging out about a year ago at my laboratory. And I was telling him about some of my data, and one guy was like, "Whoa, that's really cool. That's interesting. I want to hear more." The other guy was like, "That's nothing. That's rubbish, Bob. What are you talking about? That's placebo effect." And I was like, "Placebo effect? Seriously? On rats? On a standardized
On bone
blinded
mineralization or
experiment?"
something. Yeah.
But he would not believe the data that was there. It was certified GLP data, the best data that you can possibly get. It's legally required by the FDA for something. I had that data, and he just wouldn't believe it because he's on one end of the spectrum. He was on the bah humbug spectrum, end of the spectrum. My other friend, he's like, Bob, it's hard to believe, but boy, that's compelling data. And you're right. You get this whole spectrum. The thing is that in medicine, the dialogue, the conversation is controlled by people on the bah humbug end of the spectrum.
At the moment, maybe in the academic community that trains and teaches, and maybe in the government community, but I feel like more and more, as I don't necessarily want to say the internet, but I think the internet is the vehicle by which people like me, like people that are not scientists or medical doctors, where they're able to just say, "Hey, I tried this and it worked for me." And then everyone in their family is more likely to try it and see if it works for them. And then suddenly you got a whole community of people who are saying, "Hey, yeah, we used to do this or this or this, and this was the conventional approach to that. But we've tried this, and for whatever reason, this seems to be more helpful and with fewer side effects." And I feel like that's the kind of the next wave, the sort of the Dr. Axes of the world, where you've got just this, you've got lots and lots of people, both in America, who are very sick because they haven't taken care of themselves. They, like me, many years ago, they don't know how to eat, they don't know how to live. And you do that for 20 or 30 years, you're going to have a lot of health problems, a lot more than I did. And I feel like that if I hadn't stopped it where I did, I would have been just like everyone else at one point. At one point in my life, there had been a breaking point where I would have had to go and say, "My life is a mess. What do I do? Please help me," because I would have been in so much pain. But I think there's a lot of options out there now where people can say, yeah, they watch TV and they see all these commercials for try this for this, but nobody really, I think either everybody hears the side effects and they ignore them now of like very trial things that are out there, or people are just so desperate they're willing to deal with it and hope that it's not them. But I do think there's people out there willing to try, well, is there something I can do that will help me? Because I have a lot of friends in the osteopathic community, so they're as rigorously trained in the medical doctor field, but they're also more open to diet, nutrition. How many people have you heard when you go to the doctor who take into account your nutrition and your sleeping as the very first thing they evaluate before they begin to do blood tests or any types of other issues? That's a huge component. Are you nutrient dense in your body? Are you consuming things that will keep your body from becoming diseased? But I don't think most people are.
You know what I think is interesting about this, Aaron, is that when we talk about people being on a point of the spectrum, and there's people dominating the conversation, and then you've got this openness that you're talking about, the availability of information. Actually, what I'm finding is that people very often migrate from one end of the spectrum to the other. And so it's very dynamic, right? So throughout their lives, doctors face different challenges, right? Because they're humans just like us. Absolutely. And so one thing that I've seen now that I've been in this PEMF world for about a decade, one thing that I've seen that's quite interesting is that oftentimes I've talked to maybe in the last 5 years, maybe 200 or so MDs about PEMF. And what I find is there's an interesting kind of progression, almost like a 12-step program, where they will start off by saying, yeah, my wife or my son has this problem, and they're not complying. They're not doing what I'm telling them to do, and they want to try PEMF or something, one of these things that doesn't really work, and maybe they can get a placebo effect, right? So they kind of come to me actually with that kind of attitude, and I've had a lot of doctors say, well, if you can assure me it's not going to hurt them, maybe they'll get a placebo effect out of it. And the doctors are telling me this when they're like 40 or 50, they're still young and vital and healthy. And many doctors believe that if you just comply, if you just do what the doctor tells you, that modern medicine will solve these problems. And then years later, the same doctor is talking to me about their own problems, but it's in a very different tone. They'll say, well, I tried everything and I complied with everything. And I was taking medications to within like the minute, I was doing exactly, precisely what was prescribed. And it still didn't work. And these guys were like, they were ruining their family relationships and their marriages 10 years ago, accusing their significant others of not complying and not doing what the doctor said. But then the doctor themselves, when they do what the doctor tells them to do, what modern medicine tells them to do, very often they move on that spectrum dramatically, because they'll go from they have this it's like a light bulb. It's like you can almost see a light bulb going on over their head. They're like, oh my, this stuff really does not work, does it? And they've been
academic light bulb where they went to school, they learned it a certain way.
Yeah.
And the people that went before them were the ones that taught them. And somebody was the originator of this mentality. But
yeah,
I don't think a lot of it is malicious. I mean, people are people. Some people are malicious and some people aren't. But I think a lot of people, they just stick with what they were credentialed. I really feel like that's that. Whether it's theology or whether it's medicine, whether it's science, whether it's the automotive industry, you stick with what works. It's your livelihood. It's not it's risky to leave that. It's sometimes dangerous as far as like losing your academic career or your prestige or,
well,
I think a lot of that's that.
It's a belief system. You have to understand. Now, I've had a big laboratory and small laboratories at various universities, different places. And I've had about, I don't know, at least 18 or 20 different medical students and medical residents, and even young, doctors who are doing research working in my laboratory. So probably half the papers that I've ever published, at least 30 or 40 papers, scientific papers with MD doctors. So I know a lot about that sort of community. And what I can tell you is that medical school, first and foremost, is a boot camp. So it is very, very similar to like, I don't mean this in a negative way, but I mean it in sort of a nuts and bolts way, sort of like a cult indoctrination.
It's conforming.
They do. Or like going to boot camp in the military. They kind of break you down. They break down your mental and emotional resistance, and then they give you a worldview. So you now have this worldview. You carry that with you for the rest of your life, your career. So they, most of the medical doctors I know, they'll poo-poo things because that's their standard visceral response. If it's not something that's accepted, and at first they'll say, well, show me a paper. And then I can say, well, there's actually 1,000 papers on PEMF. Oh, that's not the right number. 1,000 papers published in peer review that show all these biological effects. And then they take a step back and they're like, well, you haven't done this. Well, you haven't done that. Well, you don't do this. And yet they could take one paper on, that's never been replicated for something that's within their worldview and say, yep, that's the way to do it. That's how it works. So I think that,
I always tell people, if you have such a locked down theory that says this can never happen, it only takes one provable, legitimate event to say, actually, this happened. Whether you saw it with your own two eyes, whether you experienced it in your own body. I mean, there's all sorts of worldview clashes out there where people will just say, no, this can never happen. Oh, it happened this one time. I can prove it. Wow, that is a threat to my worldview. I don't even know what to do about that now. Right. So what about these people that aren't open to this credible evidence? Now I'm torn between these people who govern me are not open to that, but this legitimately happens. And I think that's why you do have a lot of these guys on YouTube who are saying, yeah, in my state, people aren't open to this. And usually they're people like you described. They themselves were sick. They tried standard medicine. They tried whatever they were told they should do, or maybe they were a doctor. So they did what they went under the knife themselves, and then they realized this is helpful. I think Western medicine thrives the best with emergency medicine. In a car crash, that is where they're the most effective in the 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5-day period. But it's the regeneration area that they're just not that good at.
Chronic disease, they seem to have trouble with that. And the thing is that they don't want to, the first thing they teach you, it seems to be when I work with surgeons, for example, first thing they teach you to be is confident, because you have to present yourself to your patient, the person you're about to cut on, as, this is going to cure you, this is going to make you better, whatever the procedure they're going to do that's approved or that's standard of care.
Yeah.
And so they tend to have surgeons, when you talk to them, tend to be overly confident. And even when they don't know at all what they're talking about, they will be very confident. And then, as you say, when you come up with one piece of evidence, it's quite compelling. And you say, well, it doesn't really work that way all the time. They have a couple of choices. They can either open their mind and say, and then become kind of equivocal, or maybe. But see, that's so fundamentally against their character that they can't do that. Then there are other choices to either accept it wholesale and say, yep, new paradigm. The third choice is to say, well, that's not really real evidence, and to discount it. And that's what they do. That's what they tend to do. But I was just going to say, I think we've covered some pretty good ground here. This has been a pretty nice long talk, and I think we should continue on with some more specific topics. But on the broad philosophical, on the broad philosophical picture that you and I have painted, which is, I think it comes down to this, Aaron. Is you don't some people are not convincible until they experience it themselves. You agree with that?
And you and I were sort of that in that sense. Like, I mean,
yeah,
I was open because I was injured. But, but I knew at that time, nothing seems to work. What is there? And with you, you're even more skeptical than me.
I'm on record. I have reports on file somewhere in NASA at Johnson Space Center saying all this stuff is nonsense, hokum, bah humbug. I wrote it down. Everything that I'm doing now, everything that I believe is true now, is completely, against.
You were one of the people who adopted the new worldview. My worldview altered, but I was open. Your worldview changed dramatically, it sounds like.
Well, mine was like, but here's the good thing, okay? Mine changed early because within a year and a half, we did the experiments at NASA. I said, no way. I was floored. I said, okay, let me clamp down on this experiment, make sure it's triple blind controlled so that nobody knows what the answer is until we're done. And we still got the same answer. So, I'm culpable for having been very overly skeptical at the beginning, but I did use the tools of science. And one of the tools of science is follow the evidence, right? Oh, yeah. So the evidence right then, it turned me around 180. I was like, well, there's something here. But I've maintained, I think, since then, a healthy skepticism. But boy, I was wrong from step one.
You're a truth seeker, so a legitimate scientist in that sense.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, right? So anybody who already knows everything, how can you find the charlatans in PEMF? I'd say the easiest way to tell a charlatan in any medical field is somebody who knows everything, right? It's like, because some people are in it for the money, but some people are not in it for the money. Some are in it for the fame, and some are in it just for the ego trip of, knowing everything. And as soon as you run into somebody who knows everything, that's when the red flags go off in my head. They're like, well, I don't know about this person. They seem to be claiming a lot more knowledge than they could have, because we just don't know.
Yeah.
But so I think, painting broad brush strokes about our discussion here, if you're going to be interested in PEMF, you've got to be open-minded. I would say don't rely upon mainstream acceptance and mainstream acceptance of proof, because that's not going to come anytime within our lifetimes.
Yeah. Sounds
right.
Good. Yep.
Okay. Well, so this was an excellent discussion, and maybe we'll sometime in the near future have a chance to continue it. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.